While Trump was busy declaring American energy dominance, Japan quietly signed a long-term LNG supply deal with Canada. And that single decision may have just redrawn the map of global energy competition. This isn't a minor trade story. Japan is the world's second-largest LNG importer. When Tokyo locks in a long-term supply contract, it's not shopping. It's making a strategic commitment. And they chose Canadian LNG over American. That tells you something. Today we're breaking down exactly what this deal is, why Japan chose Canada over the United States, what it means for Canadian energy revenue and jobs, and why Trump's push to make America the world's dominant LNG supplier just got significantly harder. Let's get into it. In 2025, LNG Canada, the country's first large-scale liquefied natural gas export terminal, located in Kitimat, British Columbia, shipped its first commercial cargo. That milestone took over a decade to reach, but it repositioned Canada from a landlocked gas producer into a Pacific-facing LNG exporter with direct access to Asian markets. Japan's appetite for LNG is not casual. The country imports roughly 70 million tons of LNG annually, making it one of the largest buyers on the planet. Following the Fukushima disaster in 2011, Japan shut down most of its nuclear capacity and replaced it almost entirely with imported gas. That dependency has never fully reversed. The deal secured between a Japanese energy consortium, including major utilities, and LNG Canada's parent companies, Shell, Mitsubishi, PetroChina, and Korea Gas, locks in multi-decade supply volumes from Kitimat. The terms reflect premium Asian LNG pricing, which consistently trades above North American or European benchmarks. The timing matters for one direct reason. Trump entered 2025, declaring the United States would become the world's dominant LNG exporter, explicitly targeting Asian markets, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan in particular. His administration pressured Asian allies to shift purchases toward American suppliers as part of a broader trade and energy strategy. Japan just said no, not with a statement, but with a contract. Here's the strategic reality that most coverage misses. Japan didn't choose Canadian LNG because it was cheaper. In many cases, U.S. Gulf Coast LNG is price competitive. Japan chose Canadian LNG because of geography and reliability. Kitimat sits on British Columbia's northern coast. A tanker leaving Kitimat reaches Japan in roughly 9 days. A tanker leaving the U.S. Gulf Coast travels around Central America or through the Panama Canal. That's 18 to 22 days, depending on canal congestion and route. Shorter route means lower shipping costs, lower transit risk, and faster delivery. For a country that has no domestic energy production and experienced an acute supply crisis after Fukushima, reliability isn't a preference. It's a national security requirement. What this signals to the market is significant. Canada now has a credible, operational Pacific LNG export route. That wasn't true 3 years ago. The moment LNG Canada began shipping, Canada moved from potential supplier to proven supplier. Japan's long-term contract confirms that status. For Canada, this shifts the entire energy equation. British Columbia's gas fields, the Montney Formation in particular, one of the largest natural gas reserves in North America, now have a direct pipeline to the highest-paying LNG market in the world. The next 6 months will determine whether this deal becomes the anchor of a broader Canadian LNG export strategy or a one-off contract. The policy decisions being made right now, pipeline capacity, indigenous agreements, export licenses, will define that outcome. Subscribe to Atlas Intelligence so you're tracking those decisions as they happen, not after the fact. Canada has been trying to build a Pacific LNG export terminal since at least 2012. Over that period, more than 20 proposed LNG projects were announced for the BC coast. Almost all of them died, killed by falling global LNG prices, financing challenges, indigenous land rights disputes, and federal regulatory delays. LNG Canada survived where others failed for 3 reasons. First, Shell led the consortium, bringing balance sheet strength no purely Canadian company could match. Second, the project secured agreements with the Haisla Nation, whose territory includes the Kitimat site, making it the first major Canadian LNG project with Indigenous partnership built into the ownership structure. Third, global LNG prices surged after Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine, making the project's economics undeniable. First cargo shipped in 2025. Japan's long-term contract follows directly from that operational proof. The decade-long failure to build Canadian LNG infrastructure is now, finally, in the past. What matters now is how fast Canada can scale. LNG Canada. Phase 1, located at Kitimat, BC, has an export capacity of approximately 14 million tons per annum, MTPA, at full operation. To put that in context, Canada's total annual natural gas production is enormous. But before this terminal existed, virtually none of it could reach Asia. It was landlocked, sold domestically, or piped to the U.S. The terminal works by receiving natural gas via the Coastal GasLink pipeline, a 670-kilometer pipeline running from the Montney gas fields in northeastern BC to Kitimat. That gas is then supercooled to minus 162 degrees Celsius, which reduces its volume by roughly 600 times, making it possible to load onto specialized LNG tankers. Those tankers then cross the Pacific. The 9-day transit to Japan is the critical commercial advantage. Compare that to U.S. Gulf Coast LNG, which travels south through the Gulf of Mexico, through or around the Panama Canal, then northwest across the Pacific, a route that adds 10 to 14 days and significant additional cost per voyage. Phase 1 is operational. Phase 2, which would double capacity to roughly 28 million tons per annum, is under active consideration. A final investment decision on Phase 2 depends on contracted demand. Japan's deal strengthens the commercial case for that expansion directly. The Coastal GasLink pipeline, operated by TC Energy, cost approximately $14.5 billion to build, over budget and over schedule, but now fully operational. Its capacity feeds Phase 1 and would need expansion to support Phase 2. Japan's identity as the buyer matters more than the volume numbers. Japan is not a free agent in energy markets. It operates within a framework of U.S. alliance obligations. It hosts American military bases, relies on U.S. security guarantees, and has historically aligned its economic decisions with Washington's preferences. When Trump's administration pushed Asian allies to buy American LNG, Japan was explicitly on that list. Japan's decision to commit long-term to Canadian supply instead is a quiet but deliberate act of strategic independence. Tokyo is telling Washington, our energy security comes first, and geography wins over politics. This also signals something to other Asian buyers, South Korea, Taiwan, and India, who are watching how Japan navigates the U.S. pressure campaign. If Japan can sign with Canada without meaningful consequence, it opens space for others to do the same. For Canada, having Japan as an anchor customer is not just revenue, it's validation. Japan's energy utilities are among the most creditworthy counterparties in the world. A long-term contract with Japanese buyers is the kind of offtake agreement that unlocks financing for Phase 2. The buyer's identity directly accelerates Canada's next expansion decision. Asian LNG prices, typically indexed to the Japan-Korea marker or JKM, trade at a significant premium to North American natural gas prices. In 2024 and into 2025, JKM prices range between $10 and $16 per million British thermal units. North American Henry Hub prices over the same period averaged roughly $2 to $3. That gap, call it $8 to $12 per unit, is what makes Pacific exports so valuable. Canadian producers selling into Asian markets via LNG Canada are capturing 3 to 4 times the price they'd receive selling domestically or into the U.S. For a 14 million tons per annum terminal operating at full capacity, Annual export revenue runs in the range of 6 to 8 billion Canadian dollars, depending on JKM pricing at the time of delivery. Federal and provincial royalties, taxes, and production levies flow from that revenue base. British Columbia's government, which receives resource royalties from Montney gas production, benefits directly. Alberta producers feeding gas into the system benefit from higher netback prices. The Haisla Nation, as equity partners in the project, receives revenue distributions, a model that is now being pointed to as a template for future Indigenous energy partnerships across Canada. For Canadian pension funds, many of which hold positions in Canadian natural gas producers, higher realized prices translate to better returns. If you have a pension through a major Canadian institution, this deal affects your retirement indirectly but concretely. Before assuming this reshapes Canadian energy permanently, 3 obstacles are real and unresolved. First, Phase 2 is not approved. The commercial case is stronger now, but a final investment decision requires additional long-term contracts, regulatory approvals, and Indigenous agreements beyond the Haisla Nation's territory. That process takes years, not months. Second, LNG prices are volatile. The $8 to $12 premium over Henry Hub exists today. If U.S. LNG supply expands significantly, which Trump's policies are explicitly designed to accelerate, global LNG prices could compress. A narrower price gap reduces the economic argument for Canadian expansion. Third, pipeline capacity is constrained. Coastal GasLink at current capacity feeds Phase 1. Scaling to Phase 2 requires either expanding Coastal GasLink or building a parallel pipeline. Both options face the same regulatory and land rights challenges that killed 20 previous BC LNG projects. The Haisla Agreement was one negotiation. Phase 2 crosses additional territories. None of these obstacles negate what's already been achieved. But they do determine whether Canada's LNG position becomes a sustained strategic advantage or a single successful project. Here's what actually shifts. Canada spent over a decade failing to build a Pacific LNG export route. Every project died. The argument that Canada couldn't compete in Asian LNG markets because of cost, because of regulation, because of political dysfunction seems settled. LNG Canada proved that wrong. Japan's long-term contract confirms it. Trump's energy dominance strategy is built on the assumption that Asian allies will buy American out of political loyalty and commercial pressure. Japan just demonstrated that when geography and reliability are at stake, commercial logic wins. Canada's 9-day shipping advantage to Japan is not a talking point. It's a structural cost difference that no political pressure campaign can eliminate. The obstacles ahead are real. Phase 2 is not guaranteed. Prices will move. Pipelines need to be built. But the foundational shift is done. Canada is now a credible operating Pacific LNG exporter with a major Asian anchor customer. That was not true 5 years ago. This is one chapter. The next one, Phase 2, additional Asian contracts and how the U.S. responds, is where this story accelerates. The decisions being made right now on Phase 2 financing, pipeline expansion, and additional Asian contracts will determine whether this becomes Canada's defining energy play for the next 30 years. That next chapter is already being written. Subscribe to Atlas Intelligence for the breakdown when it moves. I'm Victoria Sterling. See you on the next one.